What unfolds when one of Hollywood's most recognizable actors appears for what is supposed to be a standard promotional interview, only to realize he has become the target of a host intent on stirring controversy at his expense? The exchange that followed turned into one of the most intense clashes ever seen on daytime television. It was a moment where charisma collided with hostility, where professionalism was tested by pointed personal criticism, and where a widely admired performer finally voiced sentiments many viewers had quietly held for years. The atmosphere shifted from light entertainment to palpable tension in a matter of minutes, leaving the audience stunned. Robert Downey Jr. had been invited onto The View to promote his newest film project. As he stepped onto the set, the crowd greeted him with enthusiastic applause. He wore his familiar confident grin, projecting the relaxed charm that has defined much of his public persona. However, from the very beginning of the conversation, it was clear that this would not be the routine publicity appearance everyone had anticipated. Joy Behar opened the discussion with a tone that carried a noticeable sharpness. She remarked on his long list of heroic roles, characters like Iron Man and Sherlock Holmes, figures admired by millions for their courage and moral conviction. Then she pivoted abruptly, suggesting there might be something contradictory about portraying such paragons of virtue given his well-documented past. Her question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Downey's smile dimmed slightly as genuine confusion crossed his face. He asked for clarification, unsure whether she was referring to his on-screen characters or something more personal. Behar leaned forward, her gaze unwavering, and made it clear she meant his real life. She referenced his earlier struggles and suggested that the narrative of redemption the public had embraced might be little more than a carefully crafted performance. The energy in the studio shifted instantly. Downey's posture stiffened, his relaxed demeanor replaced by measured caution. He reminded her that he had spoken openly for years about his past difficulties and recovery journey. He had never hidden from his mistakes, nor had he attempted to rewrite history. He gently pointed out that he believed the purpose of his visit was to discuss his current creative work, not to relitigate decades-old chapters of his life. Behar pressed further, her tone laced with skepticism. She questioned whether the celebrated comeback story, his transformation from troubled figure to beloved star, was simply another role he played. How could audiences be sure, she asked, that he was not still the same person he had once been? The insinuation was clear. Perhaps the redemption arc itself was a performance designed for public consumption. Downey leaned back, his trademark wit giving way to controlled frustration. He responded deliberately, stating that his recovery, his growth, and his family life were not theatrical acts. They were the most authentic elements of who he was. He emphasized that genuine change is not an overnight spectacle but a sustained commitment, often carried out away from cameras and headlines. Rather than easing the tension, Behar countered with a smirk, suggesting that such a defense was precisely what someone would say if they were maintaining an illusion. She argued that his resurgence had become central to his brand and implied that it was a convenient and highly profitable narrative. Around the table, the other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, sensing the conversation veering into combative territory. The line of questioning then moved to politics. Behar pointed out that he often portrayed patriotic heroes yet rarely made bold public statements on contentious political issues. She asked whether his relative silence was a strategic decision to avoid alienating fans. Was that restraint too part of the act? Downey's jaw tightened. He calmly stated that multiple issues were being blended together unfairly. Acting in fictional stories, he explained, does not obligate someone to adopt a specific public political posture. He questioned whether the intent of the segment was genuine discussion or engineered controversy designed to generate attention. For a brief moment, Behar appeared unsettled but maintained that she was simply asking what viewers might want to know. As a wealthy and influential public figure known for portraying heroic characters, she argued, it was reasonable to examine whether the individual behind those roles embodied similar virtues. Downey's composure began to fracture, though not from vulnerability but from indignation. He posed a pointed question in return. When a host invites a guest and then focuses on dismantling their character on live television, is that an act of heroism? When someone's lowest points are revived and repurposed for ratings, does that reflect accountability or opportunism? Behar insisted she was holding him responsible, not attacking him. Downey responded with rising intensity, asking what exactly he was being held accountable for. Overcoming addiction, rebuilding his life, acknowledging past errors. He suggested that the real performance unfolding might not be his own but rather the theatrical posture of a host framing confrontation as journalism. The exchange escalated. Behar defended her experience and professionalism, noting her long career in broadcasting. Downey did not retreat. He shot back that professionalism requires fairness and respect, not ambush tactics. In that moment, the studio felt less like a promotional set and more like a battleground of competing narratives. One centered on redemption and personal evolution, the other on scrutiny and skepticism. What had begun as a typical celebrity interview transformed into a raw confrontation about authenticity, accountability, and the fine line between inquiry and provocation. The audience watched as the polished veneer of daytime television slipped, revealing something far more volatile beneath the surface. There is a clear distinction, and he made that plain. He added that he believed the audience was perceptive enough to recognize it without being told. Joy's tone rose, sharpening with irritation as she insisted she was posing fair inquiries about his integrity and sincerity. She argued that viewers deserve transparency about the people they admire and elevate. He let out a short laugh, though there was no amusement behind it. He replied that the public was already well aware of who he was. They had watched him make serious mistakes, endure consequences, and slowly rebuild his life piece by piece. They had seen him evolve into a devoted father, a committed husband, and a professional who consistently shows up prepared to do his job. What they were witnessing now, he said, was an attempt to dismantle that progress for the sake of spectacle. Joy objected, claiming that was not her intention, but her response lacked firmness. He pressed her, asking what the true purpose was. From his perspective, it appeared he had been invited under the pretense of discussing his work, only to be confronted with personal criticisms framed as investigative questioning. He told her candidly that such tactics reflected more on her character than on his. An uneasy silence spread across the studio, broken only by the faint mechanical whir of cameras. Joy tried to respond but momentarily faltered. He leaned forward, eyes intense, projecting the commanding presence that had made him so magnetic in countless roles. He stated plainly that the real man sitting there was someone who had committed serious errors, taken responsibility for them, and devoted years to becoming better. He believed in redemption because he had lived through it. What troubled him, he said, was seeing a host disregard basic courtesy in favor of manufacturing a viral confrontation. Her face flushed deeper as his words settled over the room. The other panelists looked visibly uncomfortable, yet Joy refused to retreat. If anything, being challenged seemed to harden her stance. She warned him not to lecture her about respect. She emphasized her long career in broadcasting and claimed she understood how to conduct rigorous interviews. If he struggled with pointed questions, she suggested, perhaps he should confine himself to scripted dialogue crafted by screenwriters. His eyebrows lifted, and a tight smile appeared, one that hinted at restrained anger. He questioned whether this exchange qualified as serious journalism. He noted that he had sat down with established news programs such as 60 Minutes, where experienced reporters managed to ask difficult questions without resorting to insinuations or ambush tactics. Challenging discussions, he implied, did not require personal attacks. Joy countered that she was demanding accountability. She insisted he could not simply rely on charm and reputation to sidestep valid concerns about his history and public positions. When she mentioned politics again, he laughed, this time with a trace of disbelief. He suggested that what had unfolded over the past several minutes resembled an attempt to undermine his character using decades old events he had already addressed openly. He asked whether her philosophy centered on attacking and discrediting rather than engaging in meaningful dialogue. One of the co-hosts attempted to ease the escalating tension, but Joy interrupted, insisting the matter was significant. She argued that he had profited enormously portraying patriotic, morally upright characters and questioned why he did not speak more forcefully about pressing social issues. If he embodied heroes on screen, she asked, where was that heroism when real-world controversies arose? His expression grew solemn. He answered that he supported numerous charitable causes, contributed to organizations assisting veterans, and worked with environmental initiatives. He simply did not believe every public appearance needed to transform into a political rally. Then he redirected the question, asking what cause was advanced by cornering a guest on live television. What truth was being served by reframing someone's recovery as something suspect? Joy maintained that viewers deserved clarity about whom they were admiring. She accused him of cultivating the image of a reformed, flawless family man and implied that the public had the right to know whether that portrayal was genuine or another carefully crafted Hollywood persona. His voice lowered, steady and controlled. He reminded her that his child might be watching at home alongside his wife. His family life was not a public relations strategy, nor was his sobriety a theatrical performance. The daily effort to improve himself was real and ongoing. What troubled him, he explained, was seeing a style of hosting that equated confrontation with public service. Joy's tone rose further as she framed herself as unfairly criticized for doing her job. She pointed out that he appeared on the program to promote a film and benefit from the publicity. In her view, that visibility came with an obligation to address unresolved questions about his history and beliefs. She argued that public figures could not selectively engage only when the conversation felt comfortable. He responded that he had never refused to discuss his past. In fact, he had spoken about it repeatedly and candidly. The difference, he stressed, lay in intention. There was a contrast between thoughtful inquiry and efforts designed primarily to provoke. Accountability, he suggested, required context and fairness, not insinuation and spectacle. The exchange intensified, each sentence layered with tension. What had begun as a promotional appearance had evolved into a debate about authenticity, redemption, responsibility, and the role of media itself. Viewers watched as the polite facade of daytime television dissolved, replaced by a raw and revealing confrontation about where journalism ends and performance begins, and about how easily a conversation can shift from discussion to accusation, when the pursuit of impact overshadows the pursuit of understanding. He rose slightly from his seat, no longer able to mask the frustration that had been simmering beneath his controlled exterior. The calm restraint he had maintained began to fracture, revealing unmistakable anger. He fixed his gaze on her and said if she wanted a truly difficult question, he had one. How did she face her reflection each morning, knowing that her profession had shifted toward dismantling individuals who were actively trying to improve themselves? How did she defend turning someone's sobriety into a joke and framing personal transformation as something suspicious? The room fell into a heavy silence. Even the crew members behind the cameras seemed frozen. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again before finally responding. She declared that she did not owe him any justification. She had been posing challenging questions for decades, she said. She would not stop simply because a well-known actor disliked being scrutinized. Scrutinized for what? He shot back, his voice reverberating across the set. For being flawed. For stumbling and then learning from those missteps. For building a stable family and career grounded in transparency about his past. If that was her definition of accountability, he asked what she would call her own behavior in that moment. From his vantage point, it resembled intimidation masquerading as journalism. Joy struck the desk with her palm, insisting she was no bully. She maintained that she was asking what needed to be asked. He responded instantly that she was not posing questions but delivering accusations. She was not searching for clarity but manufacturing friction. The saddest part, he added, was that in her determination to undermine him, she had abandoned the principles that define genuine reporting. Another host attempted to calm the exchange and steer it back to safer territory, but Joy refused to relent. She warned him not to lecture her about journalism. She claimed she had been challenging influential figures long before he had faced legal trouble in his youth. The reference landed sharply, echoing through the studio like a crack of thunder. He went utterly still. The shift in his expression signaled that something had changed. In a quiet, controlled tone, he observed that this was the moment her facade slipped. When the veneer of professional inquiry failed to stick, she pivoted to personal blows. She reached for his lowest chapters because she lacked a stronger argument. She attempted to soften her words, saying she had merely stated a fact. He cut her off, asserting that it was not neutrality but cruelty. He reminded her that he had maintained sobriety for more than 15 years. He had reconstructed his life, dedicated himself to his family, and contributed positively to society. Yet in her framing, none of that seemed to carry weight, because she preferred to spotlight who he had been at his weakest rather than who he had become at his strongest. Her face flushed deeper, but she pressed on, questioning what about those who never received second chances? What about individuals without wealth or influential connections to support them through similar crises? He paused before answering, his tone steady and reflective. He acknowledged that he had been fortunate. He had access to resources and support that many others lacked. He did not deny that reality. Instead, he explained that he tried to use that privilege responsibly. He worked with rehabilitation initiatives, contributed funds to recovery programs, and supported scholarships for people striving to rebuild their lives. Those efforts, he noted, rarely generated headlines because they did not fit a sensational narrative. She denied attempting to create a spectacle, but her rebuttal sounded faint. He asked again what her objective was. He had come prepared to discuss a film, to entertain viewers, and to engage in an open exchange. Instead, the conversation had revolved entirely around dissecting his past and questioning his sincerity. He wondered aloud what she hoped to achieve beyond embarrassing a guest before a national audience. Her voice wavered as she insisted she sought authentic answers from someone who had shaped a public persona over many years. He leaned closer, eyes intense. His public persona, he said, was not a carefully engineered illusion. It was simply the truth, a man who had battled addiction, made grave errors and committed himself to repair. That narrative was not fabricated, it was lived. He then pointed out that her own public identity centered on being a host unafraid to ask hard questions. Yet the exchange unfolding before viewers suggested she was less interested in understanding than in provoking harm. The statement lingered in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Her expression shifted rapidly from disbelief to anger to something approaching alarm. She declared she would not tolerate being insulted by someone who believed fame exempted him from critique. He laughed, though the sound was cold rather than amused. He reminded her that he had faced criticism from film reviewers, industry insiders, and even governmental figures. The distinction was that those critics engaged with substance. What she was doing, he argued, was not critique but attack. He emphasized that there is a fundamental gap between evaluating someone's actions and targeting their character for dramatic effect. One approach seeks clarity and accountability, the other seeks damage. In his view, she had crossed that boundary. The conversation had moved far beyond spirited debate and into territory defined by hostility. The studio atmosphere remained tense, charged with the awareness that millions were watching in real time. What began as a promotional appearance had escalated into a broader argument about redemption, fairness, and the ethics of public discourse. The clash laid bare not only the fragility of reputations but also the power dynamics at play when scrutiny becomes spectacle, and when the line between accountability and aggression blurs before a live audience. Joy's voice climbed to a sharp pitch that made people in the studio visibly flinch. She declared that her purpose was to keep celebrities accountable, when they believed they could stroll onto the set, flash a smile, and glide through an interview without addressing serious issues. Serious issues, he repeated as he rose from his chair. For a brief second, it seemed he might leave the stage entirely. Instead, he steadied himself and spoke with controlled intensity. He explained that a meaningful question might have sounded very different. It could have explored how his past struggles shaped the way he portrays courageous characters. It might have asked what he hoped audiences would learn from his journey toward sobriety. Those, he emphasized, would qualify as thoughtful inquiries. What had been happening instead felt like an effort to tarnish his reputation under the guise of reporting. Another co-host attempted to calm the escalating tension, urging both sides to reset the discussion. Joy interrupted again, her tone growing more forceful. She insisted she needed no guidance on conducting interviews. She had been challenging powerful figures for years and would not soften her approach simply because a well-known actor bristled at scrutiny. He turned fully toward her, eyes intense enough to eclipse the glare of the studio lights. She had labeled him privileged, and he seized on that word. If privilege was the topic, he said, then it was worth discussing the privilege of holding a national platform and using it to demean invited guests. There was also the privilege of cloaking personal hostility in the language of journalism. He suggested that the confrontation had little to do with his history or his views. It appeared instead to be about asserting dominance in front of a live audience. Joy reacted with indignation, demanding to know how he dared to accuse her of such motives. He countered swiftly, asking how he dared to object to conduct he perceived as inappropriate. How dared he refuse to let his recovery become a spectacle? How dared he expect basic respect from someone who claimed professional standards? He added that years of personal growth had taught him to recognize unhealthy dynamics, and what he was witnessing fit that pattern. The accusation seemed to strike her hard. Her complexion shifted from pale to flushed as she struggled to maintain composure. She told him he knew nothing about her. He answered calmly that he knew what he was observing in that moment, a host willing to sacrifice integrity and a guest's dignity to create a dramatic segment. He described seeing someone who had forgotten that interviewees are human beings rather than mere content. Joy attempted to regain ground by asserting that she treated all guests equally and posed difficult questions to everyone. He disagreed firmly. He said he had watched the program and seen her soften her tone with politicians she favored and celebrities she admired. This exchange, he argued, was not about consistency in questioning but about selecting him as a target. He believed viewers deserved to understand why. She snapped that she owed him no explanation regarding her methods. He responded with a thin smile that carried little warmth. She might not owe him, he conceded, but she owed her audience transparency. They deserved to know why a guest invited to discuss creative work had instead been confronted with personal insinuations. They deserved clarity about why this approach was being framed as journalism. Another effort was made to redirect the conversation toward his latest film, but Joy pressed on. She admitted frustration with entertainers who she believed tried to shape narratives in their favor. She was wary of actors appearing on talk shows expecting gentle treatment while earning vast sums portraying heroic figures they could never embody in reality. Her words lingered in the air. He nodded slowly, as though something had finally been made explicit. He said quietly that the exchange had never truly been about public service or accountability. It appeared rooted in resentment toward those in his field. He suggested she had decided before he even stepped onto the stage that she would challenge him aggressively and had structured the entire conversation around that decision. She insisted that was not accurate. He challenged her gently but directly. Every inquiry, he pointed out, had been framed to cast him in a negative light. Each response he offered had been interpreted through a skeptical lens. His candor about past failings had been turned into ammunition. If that pattern did not reflect personal bias, he asked what else could explain it. She repeated the word accountability. though the conviction behind it seemed diminished. He shook his head, explaining that accountability involves presenting evidence and allowing fair explanation. It requires examining actions with context rather than assuming motives. What had transpired felt more like an attempt at humiliation because it promised compelling television. He acknowledged that the segment might indeed attract attention. People would likely watch, debate, and circulate clips. It might even be labeled a success in terms of ratings. Yet he hoped viewers would discern the difference between principled criticism and personal attack. He hoped they would understand that responsibility does not necessitate cruelty and that even public figures deserve a baseline of respect. He stood upright, clearly preparing to depart. He said he had arrived eager to discuss a project he cared deeply about, and to engage with an audience that had supported him for years. Instead, he had spent much of the appearance defending his sobriety, his family, and his integrity against accusations unrelated to any current wrongdoing. That dynamic, he stated, did not reflect journalism, accountability, or entertainment. It reflected something far less constructive. Joy made one final attempt to stop him, arguing that leaving amounted to avoiding tough questions. He paused, glancing back. He clarified that what had taken place were not probing inquiries but personal attacks. He had learned through recovery that he did not have to tolerate harmful behavior, regardless of the source or the setting. That lesson, he implied, was among the most valuable he had gained. He offered a brief expression of gratitude to viewers who had supported his journey and believed in the possibility of change. Then he removed his microphone with deliberate care. Joy accused him of fleeing scrutiny. He turned once more and said that genuine scrutiny rests on evidence, fairness, and balanced questioning. What had occurred was different, personal barbs shielded by claims of professionalism. With that, Robert Downey Jr. exited the set of The View, leaving a hushed studio behind. The co-hosts appeared unsettled, and the cameras lingered on the palpable silence before cutting away. When the broadcast resumed, the atmosphere remained strained, a stark reminder of how quickly a standard interview can transform into a public reckoning about respect, responsibility, and the true meaning of accountability.